Soft piano plays. A quiet bank lobby. The low hum of fluorescent lights. A woman in her 60s steps inside, pressed slacks, well-worn purse, eyes that have seen more than they reveal. She waits patiently, but something shifts. A young teller stiffens. A manager whispers. And suddenly, silence becomes suspicion. Why is she being watched like a stranger, in a place her own husband built? No raised voice. No sudden scene. Just a quiet presence, slowly erased by people who should have known better. What happens when dignity walks into a room, and no one recognizes it? The bell above the door chimed as she stepped inside, soft, almost polite. But the presence that followed was anything but ordinary. Loretta Washington paused just past the threshold of the branch lobby, her low heels clicking gently against the marble floor. The place was quiet, humming with fluorescent lights and the faint rhythm of a copy machine somewhere behind the glass doors. A few customers sat in vinyl chairs near the waiting area, heads bent over their phones. No one looked up. No one knew. She didn't wear power on her sleeve that day. No pearls, no courtroom blazer, no headlines attached to her name. Just a navy cardigan, slacks, and a leather bag worn from years of purposeful use. Her natural gray curls framed a face lined with wisdom and battles won. It was supposed to be a simple Tuesday. She moved toward the teller line with quiet intention. A young man in khakis nodded at her absently as he exited. Two tellers remained behind the counters, one of them glancing up briefly before returning to her screen. Next in line, the teller called out, not looking. Loretta stepped forward. "Good afternoon," she said gently. The teller didn't respond. Instead, she slid a form across the counter without lifting her gaze. Loretta glanced at the paper, withdrawal request. "I'd like to take out $3,000 from our joint account," she said, pulling out her ID and bank card. Still without eye contact, the teller replied, "Go ahead and fill that out, ma'am." Loretta took a slow breath and began writing. She'd been in dozens of branches like this, some better than others, but this one felt colder than most. She could already feel it, that quiet thing that hung in the air before a storm. As she signed her name, she heard soft voices from behind the glass door leading to the offices. Laughter. A man's voice, white, middle-aged, confident. She didn't know yet, but she would. Sliding the completed form and her ID across the counter, Loretta offered a gentle smile. "There you go, dear." The teller picked up the card and hesitated, just a second too long. Her eyes narrowed, flicking between the ID and Loretta's face. Then came the pause, a small furrow in the brow. The lips pressed thin. "Excuse me a moment," the teller said, and walked away without further explanation. Loretta's smile faded. Her hands remained folded on the marble counter, calm and still. But inside, that old ache started again. The same one she'd felt in courtrooms, in boardrooms, in neighborhoods where folks assumed she was just the help. And now here, in this bank, in his bank. A man across the room looked up briefly, then looked away. Loretta turned slightly, scanning the lobby, the logo above the desk, the framed poster near the entrance. Washington Federal, built for the future. Her husband's name. Her legacy. And now, apparently, a place where she wasn't recognized. Or worse, was, and treated this way anyway. She straightened her shoulders, her voice calm but solid. "This should be interesting," she murmured. And it would be. Loretta's eyes moved slowly across the lobby, taking in every detail. It looked like any other bank on the surface, polished counters, fake ferns in bronze pots, and motivational posters about financial growth. But this one was different. This one bore her family's name. Her husband, Charles Washington, had founded Washington Federal nearly 3 decades earlier. Back then, it had started as a single community branch with one mission: banking black families with dignity. Loretta had been by his side every step of the way, organizing fundraisers, navigating zoning laws, hosting workshops on financial literacy from the basement of their own home. They built it together. He handled the money. She handled the message. And yet, here she was, anonymous in the house she helped build. She caught her reflection in a framed certificate behind the desk, Washington Federal Community Impact Award. Her curls were silver now, her skin softer at the edges, but her spine? Still straight, still steady. From the back office, muffled laughter floated through the frosted glass. She recognized that voice now. Doug Whitman, branch manager. Charles had mentioned him once. Former big bank guy, good on paper, still learning the culture. Loretta had raised an eyebrow at the time. Still learning? Or still judging? She glanced at the teller's empty station, then at her watch. 3 minutes had passed. No explanation. No courtesy. A customer beside her, a woman in scrubs mid-40s, leaned closer and whispered, "You all right, ma'am?" Loretta smiled gently. "I'm just waiting to be told who I am." The woman gave her a curious look, then glanced nervously toward the back. "They don't usually take this long." "I'm sure they don't," Loretta replied, her tone even but weighted. She remembered standing at this very counter years ago, not as a customer, but as a speaker at the grand opening. Her voice had echoed through the space as she declared, "This isn't just a bank. It's a promise." Now, that promise felt cracked. A door clicked open somewhere in the back, followed by hushed voices and hurried steps. Loretta didn't turn. She didn't need to. She knew the sound of someone preparing to challenge her, and the sound of someone about to regret it. She folded her hands again. Steady. Ready. Because what was about to happen wasn't just about a transaction. It was about memory. About legacy. And about how quickly people forget who helped build the very ground they're standing on. The teller reappeared with Loretta's ID in hand. She didn't look rushed. If anything, she moved slower, shoulders tight, eyes a touch too guarded. "Thanks for waiting," she said curtly, slipping behind the counter. She didn't return the ID right away. Loretta gave a polite nod. "No trouble at all." The teller's fingers hovered above the keyboard, then stopped. She stared down at the driver's license again, then at Loretta. Her brow furrowed, just enough for Loretta to catch it. There it is. That quiet flicker of disbelief. The kind that didn't come from fraud alerts or banking policy. It came from assumption. "I'm sorry, ma'am," the teller said slowly, "but we'll need to verify a few more things before we can process this withdrawal." Loretta tilted her head, her voice still gracious. "What sort of things?" "Just, standard security checks," the young woman replied, her tone vaguely apologetic but unconvincing. Loretta let the silence sit, then leaned in just slightly. "Honey, you've got my name, my ID, and my bank card. There's nothing standard about what's happening right now." The teller looked away, pretending to review the screen. She was young, mid-20s maybe, with straight brown hair pulled back so tight it gave her an anxious air. Whether she was following orders or instincts, Loretta couldn't yet tell. But she knew the look. She'd seen it on jurors, realtors, nurses, even neighbors. The same look that asked, "Are you who you say you are?" And underneath it, "Do you belong here?" "I'll need to check with the manager," the teller said finally. Loretta gave a knowing smile. "Of course you do." She leaned back slightly, folded her hands again, and watched as the young woman disappeared once more, this time behind the frosted door that led to the back office. The air in the branch had shifted. A couple of customers were now glancing her way, not openly, not yet. But they felt it. The tension. The change. Loretta's jaw set. She knew what this was. She'd come in today expecting to be treated like any other customer. But what she was getting now wasn't banking protocol. It was something older, deeper, the kind of scrutiny people like her had endured for generations. And she wasn't going to let it slide. Loretta didn't move when the frosted door opened again. The teller returned, but this time, she wasn't alone. A man walked in behind her, mid-50s, stocky, wearing a fitted navy blazer and rimless glasses that looked like they belonged in a boardroom. He exuded quiet authority, the kind that said, "I'm in charge here," whether he earned it or not. His name tag read, Doug Whitman, branch manager. He offered Loretta a polite smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Good afternoon, ma'am," he said smoothly. "I understand you're requesting a withdrawal?" Loretta gave him a slow nod. "Yes. $3,000. I already provided my ID and bank card." Doug glanced at the teller, who gave a quick, uncomfortable nod. Then he turned back to Loretta. "Mind if I take a look at your identification, Mrs. Washington?" "You may," Loretta said, voice calm but firm. "Though I'm curious why it requires two sets of eyes." Doug didn't respond. He lifted her license and held it up to the light like he was inspecting a piece of currency. Then he flipped it over. "Mrs. Washington," he began, his tone casual but too careful. "Is this your first time banking with us?" Loretta blinked slowly. "No, Mr. Whitman. I've banked here since the day this branch opened. My husband, Charles Washington, founded this bank. Perhaps you've heard of him." Doug's brows lifted slightly, just for a second. Then the practiced smile returned. "Of course. I've heard the name. And yet you're treating me like I walked in off the street," Loretta said softly. He cleared his throat. "Well, with any large withdrawal, we follow certain protocols. Just precautionary, you understand." "It's $3,000, Loretta replied. "Not exactly a security threat." Doug placed the ID back on the counter, but didn't slide it toward her. We've had incidents with fraudulent accounts. We take it seriously. Loretta folded her arms. Let me guess. You don't recognize me, so you assume I don't belong. Not at all, Doug replied quickly. This is about policy, not appearance. She leaned in slightly, voice lower. Is that why the man in the gray suit withdrew $5,000 earlier without a second glance? No ID hold. No manager. No delay. The silence hung heavy. Doug shifted. The teller looked down, red creeping up her neck. Loretta didn't blink. I'm not here for a lecture on policy, she said. I'm here for my money. So unless there's a legitimate reason why you're blocking this transaction, I suggest you say so now. Doug's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. And Loretta knew in that moment, it wasn't about banking. It was about bias. And now it had a face. Doug finally cleared his throat and gave Loretta a polite nod that barely masked the discomfort behind his eyes. Mrs. Washington, he began, we take every precaution to protect our clients. I'm sure you understand. Loretta folded her hands atop the counter. Precautions are one thing. Assumptions are another. Doug let the words hang there, but didn't respond. We just need to confirm some details, he continued after a beat, avoiding her gaze. Could you tell me the last deposit made into this account? Loretta blinked slowly. Excuse me? It's a routine part of account verification for transactions over a certain threshold, he said, almost too quickly. She gave a short, dry laugh. I've made dozens of withdrawals from this branch. Never once been asked that. Is this a new policy, or one you pull out only for certain people? Doug raised his palms slightly. It's not personal. Everything about this is personal, Loretta said, her voice still low but sharpening. You've had my ID for 10 minutes. You've verified my account number. You have my name, my face, and 25 years of history with this institution. And yet here we are, still pretending this is about protocol. Doug's lips tightened. It's just a simple question. No, Loretta said, leaning forward slightly. It's not. You're asking me to prove I have the right to access my own money. Would you ask that man in the gray suit for his last deposit amount? Or did he look the part? Doug didn't answer. I don't have the number memorized, Loretta continued. But you do. Or you could, if you pulled up the account like you would for any other customer. Doug adjusted his glasses, buying time. It's for your safety. Don't insult me, she cut in, her voice firm now. Let's call this what it is. You're uncomfortable. Because I don't fit your idea of who belongs on this side of the counter. The teller stood frozen nearby, her eyes fixed on the monitor, pretending to type. But her shoulders were rigid. Doug looked toward the back office, as if hoping for a distraction, but none came. Loretta took a breath. Slow. Controlled. This isn't about a banking policy, Mr. Whitman, she said. This is about what you think someone like me is supposed to look like. And I promise you, you're not the first man to make that mistake. She straightened her shoulders and looked him directly in the eye. And you won't be the last to regret it. Doug shifted uncomfortably behind the counter, his hands now resting flat against the polished surface. He opened his mouth like he was about to respond, but no words came. Loretta watched him carefully. She had seen that look before, in depositions, in public meetings, even on the witness stand. It was the look of a man who knew he'd crossed a line, but couldn't admit it. Not out loud. So instead, he reached under the counter. Click. It was subtle, but Loretta heard it. Not the sound itself, but the feeling that followed. The kind of silence that arrives just before something unpleasant. Doug straightened, smoothing the front of his blazer. His voice, when it returned, was overly composed. Mrs. Washington, he said, we're doing our best to assist you, but you're making this interaction more difficult than it needs to be. Loretta raised an eyebrow. By asking questions? He ignored that. For the safety of our staff and customers, I'm going to have someone from our security team join us. There it was. She exhaled slowly, pressing her fingers together on the counter. Security. Of course. A few customers in the lobby looked up now, pretending not to stare, but clearly aware that something was shifting. One woman clutched her purse a little tighter. A man in business casual lowered his phone, watching from the side. From a hallway near the back office, a door opened, and a tall security guard stepped into view. Broad-shouldered, white, expression unreadable. His eyes scanned the room before locking onto Loretta. He walked toward her, measured, silent, hand resting a few inches from his utility belt. Doug turned to him and spoke with a rehearsed calm. This customer is having difficulty verifying her transaction. I'd like you to be present while we attempt to resolve the issue. The guard nodded but said nothing. Loretta didn't move. She stood tall, hands still gently folded, voice quiet but firm. "Tell me something, Mr. Whitman," she said, turning slightly toward him. "Did you call this man because I raised my voice? Because I threatened anyone? Or because I asked you to treat me like every other customer?" Doug's jaw tightened. "This is procedure." "No," Loretta replied. "This is intimidation. And we both know it." The guard shifted, suddenly unsure. Loretta looked up at him. Not afraid, not confrontational, just steady. "Are you here to protect me? Or remove me?" The question hung in the air. He glanced at Doug, then back at Loretta. "I'm just here to observe, ma'am." "Good," she said. "Then observe this." She reached calmly into her purse, pulled out her phone, and tapped the record button. "Let's make sure we get all of this on camera, since transparency seems to be in short supply." And just like that, the room changed again. The bank was no longer in control of the narrative. She was. Loretta held the phone steady, the red recording dot glowing in the corner of the screen. Her voice was measured low, but clear enough for every corner of the bank to hear. "This is Loretta Washington," she began. "I am standing in a branch of Washington Federal, the bank my husband founded, and where I have held a joint account for over 2 decades. She turned the camera slightly toward the teller, who now looked frozen in place, eyes wide and fixed on the countertop. "This young woman took my ID without issue," Loretta continued. "But once she saw the name and the face didn't match what she expected, she walked off." Without a word, Doug stepped forward slightly, hands raised. "Mrs. Washington, let's not escalate." Loretta turned the camera on him. "You mean like calling in security? That kind of escalation?" The security guard shifted awkwardly beside the counter, suddenly unsure of his role. "Mr. Whitman," Loretta said, still recording, "you denied me access to my own money, despite valid identification, account information, and over 20 years of history with this bank." She paused, letting the silence fill the lobby. Several customers were watching now. A man in business attire had stopped mid-transaction at another window. An older woman near the ATM had her hand resting on her cane, staring openly. "You've asked me questions no other customer has been asked today. Not the man in the gray suit who walked out with $5,000. Not the woman in the floral blouse who got her check cashed with a smile. Just me." Doug looked cornered. His lips parted, then pressed shut again. "And why is that?" Loretta asked, voice now sharper. "Because I didn't walk in here with pearls and pressed silk? Because I wore sneakers instead of heels? Or because I'm a black woman who didn't smile when you doubted her?" Her voice didn't shake. It didn't need to. "Let me be clear," she said. "This is not about procedure. It's about perception. About the assumptions you made the moment I walked through those doors." She slowly lowered the phone. "Now tell me, Mr. Whitman, what should I do with this footage? Send it to corporate? Or should I let the public see how Washington Federal treats its own founder's family?" Doug was pale now, his mouth moving, but no sound escaping. Loretta straightened. Her chin lifted ever so slightly. "This isn't just about me. It's about the next woman who looks like me. The next time someone in this building decides respect is something we have to earn twice." A heavy silence settled across the lobby. No one moved. No one spoke. And in that stillness, Loretta's dignity didn't just remain intact. It towered. Loretta stood still, letting the silence settle like dust after a storm. Doug looked pale now, his face slack, eyes darting to the security guard who remained rigid at his side. The teller shifted nervously, hands hovering over the keyboard she clearly wasn't using. Customers had stopped pretending to mind their own business. The entire branch was holding its breath. Loretta slowly lifted her ID from the counter, turning it so the camera could see the name clearly, Loretta Washington. Then in one fluid motion, she reached into her purse again, not for a phone this time, but for a small, worn leather wallet. She opened it and pulled out a photograph. The edges were soft with age. In the image, a younger Loretta stood beside a smiling man in a navy suit, holding oversized scissors in front of this very bank. Behind them, the banner read, "Washington Federal, Grand Opening." She turned the photo toward Doug. "You see this?" she said quietly. "That's me. And that man beside me? That's Charles Washington, my husband, the man who built this institution from the ground up." Doug's mouth parted slightly, but no words came out. "I helped design this branch. I stood right outside that door during the ribbon cutting, welcoming the community with open arms. I've written speeches for this bank, donated to local programs in its name. My signature is on half the community grants that fund the very neighborhoods you serve. Loretta stepped slightly closer to the counter, not aggressive, just grounded. Rooted. And today I walked in here in a cardigan and walking shoes, not pearls and heels, and suddenly I'm not credible? The security guard shifted uncomfortably. The teller finally looked up, her face flushed, eyes wide. Loretta's voice dropped just enough to cut clean. You didn't just question a customer, Mr. Whitman. You questioned a founder's wife. A woman who helped make your paycheck possible. Doug's expression cracked. His voice, when it finally returned, was hoarse. Mrs. Washington, I sincerely apologize. I had no idea. That's the problem, Loretta said, steady. You didn't care to find out. She turned her phone to face him again. You wanted proof. Here it is. Then she faced the lobby. To those watching, she said calmly, this isn't about ego. It's about what happens when we assume who belongs, and who doesn't. I've seen this before. Lived through it. Fought it. But I never imagined I'd face it in the building that bears my family's name. She lowered the phone again, looked at Doug one last time, and asked with a small, cutting smile. Now, Mr. Whitman, do you know who I am? He didn't answer. He didn't need to. Everyone in that room knew now. The silence that followed Loretta's final question hung in the air like smoke. Doug stood there, frozen, his earlier confidence now stripped down to something raw and embarrassed. The weight of her words, the photo, the name, all of it had landed like a stone dropped in still water. The ripple spread across the room. The teller swallowed hard and stepped back, her hands trembling slightly as she placed Loretta's ID on the counter with a reverence that hadn't existed 10 minutes earlier. She didn't say a word. The security guard, who just moments ago had positioned himself like a wall, now shifted back a half step. His eyes moved from Loretta to Doug, silently asking, Am I still needed here? Doug cleared his throat, finally speaking. His voice cracked. Mrs. Washington, I sincerely apologize. This was a complete misunderstanding. Loretta didn't respond right away. She let the apology hang untouched. Then she reached for her ID, slipping it into her wallet with the same deliberate calm that had carried her through every minute of this ordeal. This wasn't a misunderstanding, Mr. Whitman, she said, looking him square in the eye. It was a misjudgment, and that's much harder to explain away. Doug's lips parted again, but she held up a hand, just enough to stop him. You had every opportunity to do the right thing, to listen, to look closer. Instead, you assumed. You let appearances and assumptions dictate policy. And then you called for backup. Her voice never rose, but each word landed like a gavel. She turned to the security guard next. You were called here to handle what, exactly? A woman asking for her own money? You saw no threat, yet you showed up ready. That uniform may protect this building, but don't let it blind you to who's actually a threat, and who's just tired of being treated like one. The guard gave a small nod. Yes, ma'am, he said quietly. Loretta turned to the teller. And you, she said softly, saw everything you needed to believe me, but chose not to. Ask yourself why that is. The teller's eyes brimmed, but Loretta didn't look away. She wasn't here for tears. She was here for change. Then Loretta slowly turned to face the room. To the silent witnesses. To the ones pretending not to watch. Her voice, still calm, still steady, filled the space. I came here as a customer. I was treated like an intruder, but I'm leaving as a reminder. A reminder that not every leader walks in with a title pinned to their chest. Some of us carry our authority in our history, in what we've built, in how we've endured. Someone near the waiting area murmured, Amen. Loretta gave a small nod, then reached into her purse one last time. She pulled out a business card and slid it across the counter toward Doug. That's the number for Charles's office, she said. You'll call him. You'll explain this. In detail. Every minute of it. Doug looked down at the card like it was a court summons. And then, Loretta continued, you'll schedule a meeting with corporate. You'll tell them exactly what happened here today, and what you plan to do to make sure it doesn't happen again. Doug nodded weakly. Yes, Mrs. Washington. Absolutely. She turned back to the lobby, took a final glance around, and with a soft, knowing smile said, Good. Then I believe we're done here. And just like that, Loretta walked out. Not with a withdrawal, but with something far more valuable. Her dignity intact, and her message delivered. The automatic doors whispered shut behind her, but the room Loretta left behind stayed frozen, like the echo of her presence hadn't quite faded. Doug stood silently, still gripping her business card like it might vanish. The teller was motionless, hands clasped in front of her. The security guard turned and walked slowly back toward his post, no longer a sentry, just a man reevaluating everything he'd assumed. Outside, Loretta walked with steady purpose toward her car. The early autumn wind caught the edge of her cardigan, but she didn't shiver. There was nothing cold in her now. Only clarity. She didn't cry. Didn't exhale in relief. She didn't need to. She had done what needed to be done. By the next morning, the fallout had already begun. Charles called her at sunrise. "Loretta," he said, his voice a mix of concern and pride. "What happened yesterday?" She told him calmly, without dramatics. She didn't embellish. She didn't need to. The facts were damning enough. "And you recorded it?" he asked. "I did." He sighed. "Then I'm going to need a conference room." And a long morning. By noon, the leadership team of Washington Federal had convened. Doug Whitman was not among them. The video had circulated privately within corporate. It didn't take long before the board demanded a formal response. Loretta didn't ask for anyone to be fired, but no one had to guess how Charles would handle it. "Doug's stepping down," Charles told her that evening. "I didn't do it for that," she replied. "But I'm not sorry to hear it." Within 2 weeks, policy reviews were underway. Mandatory bias and inclusion training was instituted across every branch, with external facilitators, not just internal HR memos. New systems for anonymous customer feedback were installed, QR codes at the exits, hotline numbers, and branch-specific reporting forms. Loretta insisted on one more addition. "Every employee," she said during a meeting, from teller to district VP, "will complete a training on the history of this institution. Who built it, why it exists, and what it means to the people who walk through those doors." They agreed. And she didn't stop there. She began showing up, quietly, unannounced, to different branches. Not in pearls or tailored suits, but just like she had that day. Ordinary. Unassuming. Watching. Listening. People started to notice. More black and brown customers began speaking up, sometimes quietly, sometimes boldly. But they spoke. And for the first time, the institution didn't push back. It listened. Loretta had become more than a founder's wife. She had become a standard, a symbol of what happens when a person refuses to shrink to fit someone else's assumptions. And yet, she never raised her voice. She never slammed a door. She simply stood firm and made others see what they'd been trying so hard not to. At a staff retreat later that year, a new hire, young Latino, fresh out of college, asked her, "Mrs. Washington, if that hadn't happened, would you have ever come back through those doors?" Loretta smiled, eyes soft but clear. "I never left," she said. "I was just waiting for the rest of the building to remember who built it." She didn't say it with bitterness. She said it with hope. Because in her heart, Loretta believed something powerful. Real change doesn't come from being loud. It comes from being undeniable. And that day in the bank, she had made herself unforgettable. Respect shouldn't depend on recognition. There's something about getting older that sharpens your vision, not just in the literal sense, but in the way you see the world, the way you read people before they even open their mouths. Loretta Washington had lived long enough to know when she was being dismissed before she spoke. And on that quiet Tuesday afternoon, in a bank with her family's name on the wall, she was reminded of a hard truth. Respect, when it's given conditionally, isn't respect at all. What happened in that branch wasn't new. It wasn't shocking. In fact, that was the most troubling part. It was familiar. Dressed differently, with no title announced, Loretta had become invisible. Or worse, suspect. Not because of anything she did, but because of who people assumed she wasn't. And yet, she never raised her voice. Never threatened. Never threw her legacy around to demand better treatment. Instead, she let them reveal themselves. And when the time was right, she showed them exactly who they had underestimated. There's power in silence, but only when it's intentional. Loretta's restraint wasn't weakness. It was strategy, and her calm dismantled a system more effectively than any outburst ever could. The lesson here isn't just about banking. It isn't even just about race, though race cut through every part of what happened that day like a quiet blade. It's about the dangerous comfort people find in their assumptions, how they let appearances do the thinking for them, how easily they believe respect must be earned by those who don't look like them. Loretta didn't just fight for herself. She stood her ground for every woman who's been second-guessed, every black elder who's been patronized, every person who's ever had to pull out proof of their own humanity just to access what they already own. And her victory didn't end with a recorded video or a removed manager. It began there, because real change doesn't come from catching people red-handed. Real change comes when institutions are forced to confront what they've tolerated in silence, and then choose to do something about it. In the end, Loretta's quiet strength did more than correct a single act of bias. It disrupted a pattern. She didn't storm the gates. She held the door open and made them see who they'd left outside. So if there's a takeaway for anyone watching, especially those of us who've lived long enough to remember when this kind of treatment was law, not just habit, it's this. Don't let them tell you respect is a reward. It's a right. And when the world forgets who you are, remind them, not with rage, but with truth. Because the older we get, the more valuable our stories become. And Loretta Washington? She didn't just tell a story. She became one. Have you or someone you know ever been treated differently because of how you looked, dressed, or where you came from, only to prove later that you belonged all along? What would you have done in Loretta's shoes? Share your story in the comments, and let's talk about why quiet dignity can be the loudest form of power. Tap like if this story moved you, and share it to keep the conversation going.